Rancher lived alone for years until the Bigfoot dragged a woman to his ranch. Before we begin, take a moment to comment your city. Where are you watching from today? And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Now settle in and enjoy the story. I never thought I'd witness this until that morning. A thick fog swallowed the ranch yard, engulfing every fence post one by one. Last night's rain had turned the ground to black mud, each step squelching underfoot. From the dark pine forest at the edge of the land, a massive figure emerged, taller than any man, broad shoulders, blocking the path, fur soaked with dew and mist. In its enormous hand, large enough to cover a grown person, it dragged a woman, barefoot clothes torn and ragged, her pale face streaked with mud. Her eyes flickered open briefly before closing in exhaustion. They passed through the old wooden gate, slow but deliberate, heading straight for the cabin. No sound broke the silence except distant caws of crows and the pounding of his own heartbeat. Wondering, is this a warning or a rescue? 10 years alone, and I'd never seen anything like this. For a decade, James Harlow's ranch had sat quietly on the edge of the northern Washington pine forest, where the trail leading in was overgrown with moss and seldom traveled. He had grown used to the silence, the sound of hooves, the only thing breaking the steady rhythm of his lonely days. That morning, raindrops still clung to the porch roof, falling steadily into the muddy ground below. The quiet was so complete, he could hear the faint hum of wire fencing vibrating in the breeze. James carried a hammer, planning to fix a rotten board in the northwest corner of the yard. But just as he bent down, a deep, resonant sound echoed from deep in the forest, not the growl of a bear nor the howl of a wolf. It was thick and heavy, like the heartbeat of something enormous. He straightened up, ears straining. The sound came again, closer this time. The earth beneath his feet trembled, a cold shiver crawling up his spine. Out there, something was coming. Part 1. The moment of arrival. The ranch lay shrouded in a thick morning fog, blurring the wooden fences just a few steps away into gray streaks. Dampness clung to James's coat, the cold seeping through every gap. He stood motionless in the muddy yard, eyes fixed on the old wooden gate where an unfamiliar sound had just echoed. At first, all he saw was a dark shape moving through the milky mist. Heavy, deliberate footsteps pressed into the wet ground, sounding like a heartbeat pounding in his chest. Each step drew nearer and clearer, heading straight toward him. Then, the figure emerged, a colossal form, tall enough that its head nearly brushed the gate's crossbeam shoulders, broad enough to almost fill the gap. Thick, soaked fur clung to it, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves with each heavy stride. Its eyes glowed faintly, deep, like river stones resting beneath a winter stream. But what made James's heart skip a beat wasn't just the creature. Cradled in its massive hand, a hand capable of snapping a tree limb, was a woman. Her upper body was supported by its grip, the rest dragging through the cold mud. Her hair was tangled, strewn with pine needles and wet soil, her face pale, lips trembling so faintly that James had to strain to see her breathing, one cheek swollen and bruised, mud dried in crusts. His heart clenched as if bound by a cold, damp rope. The Bigfoot crossed the gate, not hurriedly, but with purpose, and its gaze, dark and deep, fixed intently on James as if to warn or communicate something. In that moment, all the sounds around the ranch faded away. Only his pounding heart and the squelch of mud beneath the giant's feet remained. James had never seen anything like this before, and he knew even if he lived 10 more years, he would never forget this morning. His grip tightened on the wooden stock of his Winchester, his palm chilled, whether from the mist or the presence before him. He was ready to face bears and wolves, but this was something else entirely. The Bigfoot stopped in the yard less than 20 steps away. Its breath formed faint clouds in the cold air, each inhale and exhale slower than James's heartbeat, but heavier, echoing from the depths of the earth. The woman groaned softly, a fragile sound, like a thread about to snap. Her eyes fluttered open, gazing into the space before her, not clear if she recognized James or was simply reacting to instinct, searching for safety. James raised the rifle slightly, aiming it between himself and the creature. He knew that just a few more inches and it would take the gesture as a threat, and if that happened, he wouldn't have time to protect her. Yet the creature's eyes held no aggression. Instead, there was a calm certainty inside a knowledge of exactly what it was doing. A gentle breeze stirred, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. James's coat fluttered, but his hand stayed steady, neither advancing nor retreating. They stood still like that in a silence so long it felt endless. Only the creak of old wood, the creature's breath, and the woman's trembling breaths filled the air. Finally, the Bigfoot stepped forward, not toward James, but toward the cabin's doorway. Duejai la bandich tieng antunhien kofong kach kechuyen jian ancho joannai. Bigfoot stopped right at the cabin's doorstep where mud stained the old wooden planks in blotches. It bent down slowly, so slowly that James could hear droplets of water falling from its thick fur onto the ground. Its massive hand opened. The woman slid down her bare feet, touching the cold, damp wood. She leaned to one side, nearly collapsing, but the creature gently propped her up with a single finger, steadying her upright. The gesture was so tender, it was hard to believe it came from a body that could snap a deer in two with ease. James hadn't lowered his gun, but his grip had loosened. Part of him, the part still struggling to believe what he was seeing, whispered that this was not an enemy. Bigfoot straightened, locking eyes with James once more. No words, no growls, just a deep, silent look, like a solemn vow. Then it stepped back. 1 step, 2 steps. The giant frame faded into the mist as if swallowed by the fog itself. Only James remained with the unconscious woman leaning against the doorframe in the dimly lit yard, where giant footprints pressed deep into the mud, unlikely to fade anytime soon. James lowered his gun and stepped forward, wrapping his arms around her and carrying her inside. As he closed the door, the wooden latch fell into place with a soft click, an unspoken promise that tonight everything inside this cabin would be protected. The cabin door shut tight, the wind and chill held at bay. Only the crackling fire and the scent of burning pine filled the small room. James set her down on the worn, deer-leather couch by the hearth, quickly pulling a thick blanket over her. The firelight revealed her exhaustion, and pain bruises mottled her skin-cracked lips from cold and wind. He dipped a cloth into the pot of warm water on the stove, wrung it out gently, and wiped the mud from her forehead and cheeks. A faint sigh escaped her throat. Her lashes fluttered, struggling against the pull of unconsciousness. James sat beside her, eyes fixed on the cabin door, where moments ago the giant had stood. She stirred slightly, a weak hand reaching out from beneath the blanket to grasp the edge of his jacket, as if afraid that letting go would plunge her back into the darkness of the forest. Outside, the mist drifted past the small window. The silence was profound, but deep inside James, a strange feeling was growing, no longer pure fear, but something he had yet to name. The firelight flickered against the wooden walls, casting shadows that traced cracks and knots like wrinkles on an old face. James remained still, eyes on the woman before him, while his hand instinctively tucked the blanket tighter around her shoulders. After a long moment, her eyelids lifted slightly. In the flickering light, her eyes glistened like drops of water, reflecting both fire and shadow. She looked around, confused and afraid, until her gaze settled on James. You're not it." Her voice was hoarse, each word dragging pain behind it. James shook his head slowly. He meant to ask what she meant by it, but the memory of the creature, its massive frame, giant hands, heavy steps, and how it carefully set her down like a guardian, not abandon her, stopped the question in its tracks. He suddenly realized something that had escaped him in the height of tension. If it had meant harm, it wouldn't have brought her all the way here. James leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. Outside, the mist lingered as if the forest was keeping a secret only half revealed. If this morning you witnessed a legendary creature bring someone to your doorstep, would you see it as a threat or a savior? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Part 2. The Confrontation. The morning mist hung thick like a heavy veil between James and the dense forest beyond. Faint light filtered through gaps in the clouds, casting pale gray-white streaks across the ranch yard. James stepped off the porch, his boots sinking deep into the soft mud, leaving prints mingling with the hundreds of enormous footprints twice the size of his own. The scent of cold earth mixed with damp fur still lingered in the air, blending with the pine fragrance from the deep woods. Less than 20 steps away it stood, a form so massive it nearly blocked the path, motionless, but not swallowed by the fog, as if the mist was part of it. James halted, his right hand resting on the worn wood of his Winchester's stock. His fingers brushed the smooth spot worn from years of use, a familiar touch that steadied him, yet reminded him that every move from here on could mean life or death. His eyes locked onto the creature's deep, dark gaze. No aggression, no hesitation. Only something quiet, as deep and still as a frozen winter lake, more unreadable than any predator's stare. A gentle breeze stirred the creaking fence and whispered pine needles at the forest's edge. Time seemed to slow, leaving only the heavy silence between man and legend, one human one being whispered about in hushed tales. James neither stepped forward nor back. In that moment, all that remained were their eyes meeting across the muddy yard and the unspoken question, who will act first? An old raindrop slipped from a pine branch, landing with a soft tap, but in that stillness, the sound rang out like a gunshot. James remained rooted, gaze fixed on the giant shadow before him. Bigfoot lifted one massive foot, the thick sole sinking into the mud. The squelch echoed slow and heavy, each step measuring the distance between it and the man blocking its path. James tightened his grip, his finger slowly edging toward the trigger. Part of him urged shoot before it comes any closer. But another part, one he wasn't ready to admit, whispered, "Wait, don't startle it." Their eyes stayed locked. In those depths, James saw something unexpected. Not the emptiness of a predator, but something close to consideration. Like it was weighing a choice: advance or retreat. The wind shifted, carrying dampness from the forest. James caught sight of the creature's massive wrist, still marked with dried mud from the woman's arm. It had carried her from far away through dense woods and icy streams just to arrive here. Only 15 steps remained. James knew that if it moved closer, he'd face a decision he'd never forget: life or death. He inhaled deeply cold air, filling his chest, settling into a heavy weight. Now, only 10 steps apart, he could see its breath rising in misty clouds, merging and fading. His index finger touched the trigger fully. One slight squeeze and the silence would shatter with a gunshot. But each passing second made it harder to pull. Not out of fear, but because of those eyes. Eyes that held no direct threat, only something deep and quiet, as if sending a message. Inside the cabin, the woman groaned softly, a fragile sound reaching the giant's ears. Bigfoot paused, tilting its head toward the door. James realized this moment they were both standing on a fragile line where every choice carried weight. Suddenly, a raven cawed from the woods, tearing through the silence. James flinched, his finger twitching but stopping mid-motion. Both remained still, but the heaviness between them seemed to shift, danger melting into something unnameable like recognition. James eased his gun downward, not fully lowering it. At that moment, Bigfoot straightened, exhaling a long breath as if accepting his answer. Bigfoot stood still for a moment longer, as if weighing its decision one last time. Its breath formed white clouds, dissolving softly into the morning mist. Then, slowly, it took a step back, one step, then another. The squelch of mud loud in the eerie silence of the yard. James stayed rooted, neither stepping forward nor raising his gun. His eyes followed every movement, and the more he watched, the more he realized those backward steps were not those of a defeated foe, but of someone who had done what needed to be done. At a safe distance, Bigfoot gave a slight tilt of its massive head toward the cabin. A small gesture, but to James, it was a clear message. She's there. Take care of her. The giant form gradually faded into the mist, disappearing among the dark, damp pines. Silence returned, not the silence of threat, but the quiet left behind by a meeting that had left its mark. James finally lowered his Winchester. His hands suddenly lighter, but his heart heavier, weighted with unanswered questions. He turned to look at the cabin where the fire still flickered behind the wooden door and thought to himself, this was only the beginning. When the giant shadow had fully vanished into the fog, James noticed his heartbeat still pounding fast, as if his body hadn't yet accepted that the danger had passed. He stood alone in the yard, boots sunk in mud, listening to the wind whisper through the fence and raindrops trickle from the roof. All that remained were the huge footprints pressed deep into the earth. They meandered from the gate right up to the cabin steps and then turned back, leading straight into the dark forest. Among them, a trail of mud marked the path the woman had traveled from somewhere deep in the woods to here. James crouched down, placing his hand over the largest print. It was cold and damp, wide enough to swallow his entire hand. A strange feeling rose inside him, not fear, not quite gratitude, but something in between, a respect difficult to explain. He looked up toward the tree line where the figure had disappeared. For a moment, he felt it was still there, hiding, watching, as if their story wasn't over yet. James stepped back into the cabin, closing the door behind him, leaving the mist and the forest to keep their secrets safe. If you were standing in James's place that morning, would you see that creature as a threat, or as an unexpected ally just entered your life? Share your answer in the comments below. Part 3. The Unexpected Gesture. The cabin's porch was soaked with dew. The wooden planks darkened from last night's rain. James stood just a few steps away, his gun still in hand, but lowered eyes fixed on the towering figure approaching. Bigfoot stopped right at the doorstep. Its breath billowed out into the cold air, forming thin clouds curling around the girl's head. In its enormous hands, her small body seemed as light as a dry twig. No growls, no bowing down to attack, not a single aggressive movement. Instead, Bigfoot slowly bent down, placing her down as one would carefully set down a precious object, protecting it from any collision. As her bare feet touched the cold wood floor, her knees buckled instantly. But before her body could fully collapse, one massive finger, thick as a child's arm, reached out, gently steadying her, preventing her fall. The tenderness of this gesture squeezed James's heart tightly. He didn't understand. The old campfire stories always painted Bigfoot as a mysterious figure, sometimes a threat, sometimes merely a ghost of the woods. But no one ever spoke of it being gentle with a human. James looked into its eyes one last time. Not the eyes of a predator, nor the vacant stare, but something deep and quiet, like an autumn lake, peaceful on the surface, but underneath currents unseen. Without a word, Bigfoot stepped back one pace, then another. The mist immediately swallowed its upper body, leaving only its broad shoulders and eyes still fixed on James, as if trying to convey something beyond human language. Bigfoot retreated a few more steps, its massive form fading, blending into the thick gray-white fog surrounding the ranch yard. Each departing footstep left a deep puddle of muddy rainwater, reflecting the faint light of the autumn morning. James remained standing, eyes following the dark silhouette dissolving. He listened, but strangely the heavy footsteps that had announced its arrival were now gone. Only the soft, rustling wind through the fence slats and a distant crow's call remained. For a moment James thought maybe it never really left. Perhaps it stood somewhere at the edge of the woods watching, waiting to see what he would do next. The thought sent a chill down his spine, not from fear, but from the sense of being entrusted with a responsibility no one else could bear. He turned to the girl slumped by the door. Her tangled hair covered half her face, her hand hanging limply, shoulders trembling slightly beneath the lingering mist. James bent down, lifting her with both hands. Her body was so light he could feel each fragile breath pressed against his chest. As he stepped inside the cabin, the wooden door closed behind him, the creak of the hinge sounding like a full stop to the strange moment just past, yet also a beginning to a story he couldn't yet foresee. The latch clicked shut, blocking out the cold wind that had been slipping inside. Inside the cabin, the fire in the hearth burned steadily, its amber glow casting warm light on the aged wooden walls, chasing away the dampness clinging to James's coat. He gently set the woman down on the long chair beside the stove, pulling a thick blanket over her thin shoulders. Her body was so cold, the blanket shivered lightly as warmth began to seep in. James sat down opposite her, his hand resting lightly on the gun's stock out of habit. His gaze drifted to the closed door. Outside, the mist still curled thick around the fence, hiding whatever might be standing there. He wondered why. Why would a creature strong enough to take down a whole pack of wolves and vanish within a single breath bring a woman to his door? And why, after doing so, would it silently walk away? A soft moan from the woman brought his attention back. Her long lashes fluttered lips moving as if trying to speak, but no words came out. James reached out lightly, touching her arm as if to reassure her she was safe now. The room was warm, but questions still lingered sharp and cold in his mind, hovering unanswered. James sat beside her, the firelight dancing along the wooden walls, casting long, soft shadows in the small room. She hadn't fully awakened. Her sleep was fragile, as if it could shatter at any moment. Suddenly, a gentle tapping sound came from the window. James stood and approached. Outside, only thick mist lay beyond the glass. But on the windowsill, a small bundle was tied with rough leather cord, a bunch of fresh herbs fragrant with earth and wild plants. James took it in hand and inhaled deeply. The scent was familiar yet mysterious, like a silent message from the creature that had just left a gift or a thank you or perhaps a sign of protection. In that moment, he felt his heartbeat slow, yet deep inside a small flame was kindled, the flame of trust and hope. James turned back to look at the woman on the chair, knowing this story would not end tonight. The bundle of herbs rested gently in his palm, its scent wafting softly through the warm cabin air. The green leaves seemed to tell a wordless story of a world humans had never touched, and of a creature that had just become a savior in this cold winter night. Outside, the mist had yet to lift. The sun seemed too weak to break through the dense veil over the wild forest. But inside James's heart, a new light had flickered, a quiet, steady belief. He knew the journey ahead would not be simple. Questions without answers surrounded him like the darkness of night. But one thing was certain, none of them would return to their old lives. James placed the herb bundle by the hearth, the flames flickering and revealing each vein on the leaves. He sighed, gazing out the window, where mist mingled with the early morning light. A new story was beginning, and he would stand between two worlds, the world of humans and the mysterious realm of the deep forest. If you were in James's place, and a legendary creature came to leave you a silent gift, what would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Part 4. The Truth Unveiled. Inside the small cabin, the fire in the hearth flickered warmly, chasing away the deep chill of the ancient forest outside. The space was filled with the scent of burning wood and the faint aroma of pine resin. The woman lay on an old armchair, her weary body curled beneath a thick blanket. Her eyes, initially tightly shut, now weakly opened, following the flames as if searching for something warmer than the light itself. James sat beside her, his rough hands intertwined, his gaze never leaving her. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling fire and her faint, uneven breaths mingling with the tension in the air. Finally, she parted her lips, her voice like a lingering dream. Bigfoot. It saved me. Her breath caught, making her words fragmentary, but the sincerity and fear packed within left no doubt in James's mind. The firelight cast a soft amber glow on her pale face. She lifted her head, eyes glistening with tears not yet dried, and began to speak, her weak voice heavy with memories. I was lost in the forest for 3 days. No food, no clean water. The first night the cold pierced to my bones. I heard wolves howling nearby, dark shapes lurking all around me. She paused, sighed deeply, her trembling hands clutching the blanket tighter. I thought I would starve, be torn apart by them. But then in the darkness, a huge figure appeared. Not to attack, but to drive away the wolves. It protected me. The flickering flames reflected in her eyes, and in that moment James sensed a transformation within her, from panic and despair to a profound and indescribable gratitude. Then it led me through paths I could never find on my own until I reached the threshold of this ranch. James looked at her, seeing in her eyes something sacred, a miracle amidst the wild western frontier he never imagined witnessing. The cabin was warm, yet a trace of the cold loneliness from the deep forest still lingered on her skin. She sat up straight, her gaze fixed intently on James's hand that was holding hers, as if to affirm this was not a dream, this was truth. I was so scared, she said, her voice hoarse, each word drawn from the depths of her soul. Scared of the dark, scared of the wolves' howls, scared of things I couldn't even name. But when it appeared, I knew I wasn't alone. Her eyes welled with tears, yet they shone with determination, a strength kindled from pain. James remained silent, letting her continue. The weight on his shoulders eased slightly, replaced by a newfound sense of responsibility and a fresh bond he had never before experienced. "I don't know what it is or where it came from," she sobbed. "But it chose me, and maybe it chose you too." In that moment, by the flickering yellow firelight, two strangers realized that survival was no accident, but an invisible thread tying them together between the wild ancient forest and the simple wooden home. In the quiet moment, the flickering firelight danced across their faces, casting soft shadows like a painted portrait. The girl looked into James's eyes, no longer filled with fear, but with gratitude and a fragile trust. James responded with a gentle nod, wordless, as if to say, "I will be here by your side." No words were needed. They understood each other through the silences woven between their breaths. She gently squeezed his hand, a simple gesture yet laden with things too deep for words. That gaze was a silent promise that no matter what challenges life might bring, at least for now, they were not alone. Outside the window, the mist still lingered, but within the small room, warmth began to spread from two hearts newly found in the darkness. The cabin's wooden door, weathered and faded by years, softly closed beside them. The firelight from the hearth illuminated the tablecloth, revealing delicate wrinkles like time's own etchings marking their lives. James walked to the small window and quietly opened it, letting in the cool breeze carrying the scent of the forest's damp earth and the fragrance of the bundle of herbs. Outside, the ancient woods seemed to breathe. The mist was lifting, and the faint light of dawn slipped through the tall trees, painting a scene of transition between darkness and light. He gazed out, thoughtful, but no longer cold. Inside him burned a new flame, a vague yet steadfast belief that though many mysteries lay ahead, he was no longer alone. The cabin door closed behind him, yet it felt like the opening of a new journey, not just for James, but also for the girl and the mysterious creature beyond, where the line between human and legend is most blurred. Have you ever experienced a moment when fear gradually gave way to trust? Share your story with me in the comments below. Part 5. The return of danger night fell, shrouding the valley in a thick, velvet black curtain that swallowed everything in darkness. From afar, the flickering lights of torches planted along the ranch fence glowed like red eyes flickering in the cold wind. James stood in the wide yard holding a blazing torch, his eyes scanning every inch of the old wooden fence. The acrid scent of burning wood and pine resin mixed with the smell of damp earth, creating a suffocating sensory tapestry of the Wild West. The silence was so deep that every breath he took seemed to blend with the crackling fire and the whistle of wind through the leaves. But deep in the darkness, amidst the dense fog, large, shadowy figures moved silently, phantom-like and indistinct. A roar echoed, resonating across distant hills and bouncing off ancient trees. The sound was deep and powerful, both a warning and a challenge. James stopped breathing hard, eyes wide, trying to see clearly what slithered through the interplay of light and shadow. Each faint movement seemed to weave between life and death, causing his heart to race every passing second, stretching endlessly. The torchlight flickered, casting shifting patches of light and shadow that made everything around him appear to flicker in a waking dream. Massive, dark shapes gradually emerged outside the fence, their forms unclear, as if the mist concealed a secret not yet revealed. They moved silently, each heavy step, leaving deep impressions in the damp earth prints larger than any humans. Occasional growls echoed distant, yet enough to chill the air like an impending storm. James stood beside the fire, eyes fixed on the darkness, back stiff as steel hands gripping his gun tightly. Cold sweat drenched his forehead despite the strong wind. He knew these shadows were no enemies to be dismissed lightly, yet he was unsure if they came as protectors or hunters. Another roar sounded deeper and more resonant, like a vow or challenge echoing through the silent night. In that moment, James felt as if he stood on a fragile boundary where not only his life but his very soul could be swept away by those shadows. The dense night enveloped the entire valley with only the crackling fire and the soft sound of footsteps pressing into the damp earth breaking the silence. Suddenly a roar rang out, not from one direction, but echoing like a chorus throughout the surrounding forest. The sound was deep, powerful, penetrating every fiber of flesh, shaking James's chest. It was both a warning and a call to the wind, stirring an unprecedented mix of anticipation and dread in the years he had lived here. James gripped his gun tighter. His hands trembled not from fear, but from the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders. Everything was no longer just about personal survival, but a battle between life and the mysterious forces beyond understanding. The shadows grew clearer in the dim torchlight, their forms colossal like creatures out of fairy tales and legends James had heard on long winter nights. But what made his heart tighten was not their ferocity, but the unusual silence interspersed with those growls, a silent message, a presence both strange and familiar. The massive dark shadows became clearer under the faint torchlight like entities both present and elusive, embodying the mysterious wildness of the West. Roars echoed, bouncing off the treetops and shaking the surrounding space. James stood tall, gripping his rifle tightly, his eyes following every movement in the darkness outside. He knew that in this moment, every choice could lead to unforeseen consequences. His heart raced faster, cold sweat trickling down his forehead, but his gaze held a steely resolve not to fight, but to protect something greater than himself. Suddenly, a large shadow stepped forward, torchlight revealing every detail of its thick fur, its face blurry in the darkness, yet carrying something not at all hostile. The intense tension mingled with a faint glimmer of hope, suggesting that tonight would not end in violence, but perhaps in a silent understanding between two worlds. After the resounding roars, a heavy silence suddenly enveloped the valley. The torches flickered, but no longer revealed any movement of the dark figures beyond the fence. Only the gentle wind whispered through the treetops, the crackling fire, and James's steady breathing remained. The mist curled around the ranch yard like a thick blanket, covering every trace of the night's events. He stood quietly, eyes fixed on the hazy sky where stars twinkled like distant lamps of another world. Inside, the feeling was both light and heavy light, because violence had receded, heavy because the unknown still awaited ahead. James sighed, gripping the last torch tightly, its flickering light reflecting on the muddy ground. He knew tonight was only the opening chapter of a story without an ending between humans and the mysterious creature. What do you think were those dark shadows, friends or foes? What would you do if you were in James's position right now? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The next morning, the mist still clung to the blades of grass, gently draping over the old wooden gate of the ranch like a delicate silk veil. No more echoing roars, no dark shadows slipping by, only the warm stillness of a new dawn. James stepped out into the yard, his footsteps soft on the damp earth still holding the night's dew. He paused, his gaze settling on a small object lying just before the gate, a bundle of herbs skillfully tied with rough leather cord, emanating a gentle fragrance, earthy forest scented with a hint of sweetness from wildflowers. The herb bundle spoke silently, a profound message from the mysterious creature that had appeared the night before, an expression of gratitude, a blessing, or simply a sign of presence that, though inexplicable, held strength and respect. James placed the bundle on the wooden table near the fire, the flickering flames casting warm light across the glossy green leaves, making them seem more alive than ever. He sighed quietly, feeling the connection newly forged between man and legend, between solitude and hope. Sometimes the savior comes in the most fearsome form. If a legendary creature brought someone to your doorstep, what would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments below.